Unit 2, Getting Started with Business Rule Application Development. This unit teaches you how to develop a business rule application with Operational Decision Manager and how to get started with decision services. After completing the unit, you should be able to identify the development tasks in building a decision management application, describe how to set up a decision service in Rule Designer, and share and synchronize decision services between the business and development environments. Here are the topics in this unit, and we'll start with using an agile development approach. The full life cycle of business decisions includes the phases and stakeholders that you see depicted here. During this unit, we'll see more about which stakeholders participate in which phases of the life cycle. The overall implementation of decision management should follow an agile and iterative approach that responds easily to change. The Agile Business Rule Development Methodology, or ABRD, includes a sequence of phases. Each phase includes iterations on a set of activities. Initial activities concentrate on business modeling, requirements gathering, analysis, and design. Early results from these activities can be implemented and tested to ensure that requirements were captured correctly. As the project evolves and requirements stabilize, more effort is then spent on implementation, testing, and deployment activities. Each ABRD phase includes iterations on a set of activities. The goal is to deliver a workable set of rules at the end of each phase, first on paper, then as a prototype in Designer. ABRD includes rule discovery and rule analysis as the first phases of the approach. So before implementing decisions, you must first find or discover them from the various rule sources. And this is when business analysts and architects usually work together to ensure that the logic is expressed correctly on paper before moving to the tools. The logic is also analyzed for overlaps, consistency, and gaps. The paper results from these phases become the application requirements that get passed on to the development team. During the discovery and analysis phases, developers can already start working on the design of the application, which includes writing code to implement business object models. Developers start setting up the rule authoring environment in Rule Designer according to early results of discovery, while business users continue with discovery tasks. ABRD supports frequent requirement and model changes during early phases of the project as business owners provide early feedback on implementation. During the initial phases of discovery, when the architects are working with the business analysts, policy managers, and other business experts, models are used as a starting point to define the scope of what the business rule application should do and to establish a context for the decisions. Without this context, you might end up implementing the wrong rules. So rule discovery includes identifying rule sources, extracting the rules from those sources, and documenting them. Discovery can involve interviewing business experts or policy managers, reading documentation, or analyzing source code. Usually, the best source for business policies is people, which means that capturing those rules requires extensive interviews with the business policy experts. If rule discovery is not done thoroughly, the knowledge gap between business experts and IT can be an issue when implementing policy requirements in core business applications. Before you can implement your rules, you must determine where the system will use the rules. Within the scope of a business process, some points in the process require a decision before proceeding. Some decisions require people to make them, but others can be automated. The decisions that people make are called manual decision points, and the decisions that can be automated are called automated decision points. So we're focusing on the automated decision points for implementation. In the example here for an online insurance application, we see multiple decision points. The process is outlined step by step from the point of view of a user who browses to a website to get an insurance quote. When the user sees the initial web page, which lists the insurance options, who makes the selection? Obviously, it's the user, so this step is a manual decision point. Next, after the user enters personal information, who validates that information? Who determines whether the user is eligible for insurance? Who calculates the price? These steps can all be automated decision points where you implement them using the business rules. By identifying all the decision points in a process, you can determine which decisions require people and which ones can be automated. After you identify the automated decision points, then you have to determine the underlying rules that are required to express the business policy. A single business decision might require several, even hundreds of business rules to express it. Business logic usually requires a series of smaller, intermediate decisions before the overall decision can be determined. For example, when processing a loan request, the main business decision is whether to grant a loan to an applicant. But when you break down that decision, you discover a series of other smaller decisions such as, did the person provide all the required information? Is this information valid? How much is this client eligible to borrow? And is the client able to repay a loan? Each of these intermediate decisions can again be further broken down into several underlying rules to implement the logic. Discovering rules for implementation involves not only documenting the rules, but also identifying the vocabulary that's required to formulate those rules, and then formalizing that vocabulary as a conceptual object model. For example, if you have rules that talk about customers, then you need an object model that includes a customer object. If you have rules about reward programs or customer categories, then your object model must also include reward and category objects. Because rule discovery is intertwined with defining the object model, these activities are iterative. The discovery phase can require several interviews between the business analysts, policy managers, and developers, so be prepared to meet often for discovery workshops. The vocabulary that the business users capture during the discovery and analysis phases becomes the requirements for development of the object models, as we mentioned in the previous slide. You then implement these requirements as Java classes or XML data, and then this becomes the execution object model, or XOM. The XOM is the code that allows the rules to execute. We'll learn more about the XOM later in the course. Decision management projects require extensive collaboration between business and technical teams. To ensure that the rules were discovered and analyzed correctly, the business users must start entering the rules into the tool as soon as possible. And this need requires that developers prepare the rule authoring environment early in the development cycle, even before all the rules are discovered. This slide outlines the steps of how the business users and the technical team work together during the early part of the project, so that the business users are able to provide early feedback on what's implemented. Next topic, designing the business rule application. This slide presents an overview of the various tasks that are involved when you, as a developer, work with Dicision services. This unit focuses on the first task, design. As a developer on this type of project, you look at the project from the angle of implementation of the business logic as a decision service, implementation of the rule vocabulary in Java or XML, and implementation of the application that will use the business logic. The first step of development involves designing rule projects in Rule Designer. The other tasks that are depicted in this graphic will be described later in the course. A rule project is a container for rule authoring artifacts that are required to produce a decision. A decision service is a set of related rule projects. In a rule project, you define the structure for the rule artifacts, set up the business object model, or BOM, and the vocabulary for editing the rules. You also collaborate with the business analysts on the rule flow that outlines the general sequence in which business logic must be evaluated within the rule set to produce the correct decision. The rule flow outline can be defined even before the rules are written. Within the rule project, you also define rule set parameters that are used to pass information from the calling application that will be used by the rules. The set of rule artifacts that are used together to produce a decision is called a rule set. A rule set might include all the rules in your rule project or only some. Each rule set within the decision service is defined as a decision operation with a unique signature of input and output parameters. The signature for the decision operation is the rule set parameters, because those parameters allow you to pass data from the calling application to the rule set and then to return the decision to the application. In order for the rules to run, you need the ZOM or execution code. The ZOM is not part of the rule project, but the elements in the ZOM are mapped to the elements in your BOM through the BOM to ZOM mapping. To make your rules available to be run or executed, you must deploy them to a server. The details of that deployment are contained in the deployment configuration, which you define as part of the rule project. Next topic, setting up decision services. In Rule Designer, you can use the decision service map to help guide you through the tasks involved in developing a decision service. The decision service map is available in the Rule Project Map view, as shown here in the screen capture. Goals are represented as rounded parts, as you see here: set up a decision service, define decision operation, deploy and integrate. Tasks are represented as links in the goals of the map. So in the set up a decision service goal, the first link or task is to create a main rule project. The map guides you through development by identifying the sequence of tasks and their status. For example, you'll see here in the set up a decision service goal, some of the tasks are grayed out, so you can't do them yet. You need to first create the main rule project. The links that are enabled are the tasks that you need to do first. When you click a link in the map, Rule Designer opens the relevant dialog box or wizard. You'll work with the map during the exercises. To create a decision service rule project, you can click the links in the decision service map, either to create a main rule project or a standard rule project. When you click a link, it opens the new rule project wizard in Rule Designer, and then you choose from the decision service rule project templates. If you only have one rule project in your decision service, you must define it as the main rule project. By default, a decision service rule project includes the list of folders that you see here. Based on the decision service map that you saw earlier, the first steps in setting up a decision service include importing the ZOM and creating the BOM. The ZOM is developed and stored separately from the rule project, so after you create the decision service rule project, you then import the ZOM to that rule project, which makes the ZOM accessible to the rule project. Once that association between projects is established, You can then create a BOM from that ZOM. You can implement the business logic in the ZOM as either Java objects or an XML schema. While the business rules will use vocabulary from the BOM, each BOM element that's used in a rule must have a corresponding ZOM implementation. Regardless of how you implement the ZOM, you can build the BOM to match the original models and requirements passed to you from the business users. If they provide a clearly defined and complete vocabulary model, the implementation of that model will require fewer iterations of feedback to produce a stable BOM and ZOM. The BOM plays a key role in the rule project because it's the source of vocabulary for the rules. You might choose to store the BOM in a separate rule project so that it can be shared across multiple rule projects within your decision service. After the ZOM is imported into the rule project, you use Rule Designer to automatically generate a BOM from that ZOM, and that creates the BOM to ZOM mapping, which maintains association between the BOM and the code in the ZOM. After you create the BOM, you can then define the decision operation, which is the next goal in the decision service map. To create a new decision operation, you click the Add Decision Operation link from the Decision Service map, which opens the Decision Operation editing window in Rule Designer. After you create and name your decision operation, you go back to the Decision Service map and click the Go to Operation map, which opens a Decision Operation map that will guide you through the steps of defining this rule set, including defining the rule variables and the rule set parameters for the rule set signature. The first task of designing the rule set signature is to create a variable set. To pass objects from your calling application to the rule engine, you use rule set parameters. However, the rules do not interact directly with those rule set parameter values. Instead, those values are transferred to rule set variables, and then the variables are used to exchange information internally within the rule set. So to access those objects from the calling application, you bind the rule set variables to the rule set parameters. But first you need to create a variable set to contain your rule set variables. You bind the rule set variables to the rule set parameters on the Signature tab of the decision operation. To define your rule set parameters, you must collaborate with the business analyst to understand what information is required for a decision and what type of information to include as part of the decision result. The rule set parameters define the interface between the rule set and the client application. So the input parameters define the data available for processing by the rule engine, and the output parameters will reflect the business decision that the rule engine returns. Parameters can be used for both input and output. Next topic, project properties. You can define specific properties on the rule project itself. Project properties are defined in the Properties dialog box, which you open by right-clicking your rule project and selecting Properties. For example, in this screen capture, you see the Decision Service menu item selected, and the option is whether to define this rule project as the main rule project or demote it to a standard rule project. In this screen capture, you see the Rule Project Folders menu item selected and the list and location of folders that are available in your project. This screen capture shows the Project References item selected. Project references define which other projects in your workspace are referenced by the current project. The Rule Engine property for your rule project allows you to choose which engine to use for the decision service, either the classic rule engine or the decision engine. You learn more about the rule engine later in the course. Next topic, using modular project organization. As you saw in the rule project properties, you can define project references between rule projects, so rules in one project can be dependent upon rules or artifacts in a separate project. This type of modularity facilitates dependencies between your rules and data. So for example, you can have your BOM in one project and your rules spread across multiple projects. The design of a decision service is to use multiple rule projects to handle the rules. This approach accommodates project growth because the number of rules in a project will increase significantly over time. This type of modular structure also facilitates rule maintenance and sharing work across multiple users. The main rule project is the top-level project in the decision service hierarchy. As you see depicted in this graphic, the rules are spread across Rule Project 2 and Rule Project 3. The BOM is in Rule Project 4. The decision operation, or the rule set, is defined in the main rule project, and it can be extracted from one or all of the rule projects that are referenced by that main rule project. In the Rule Explorer view of Rule Designer, when you look at rule projects listed in your workspace, you can identify the main decision service rule project by the decision service icon. If the decision service includes other rule projects, they're referenced by this main rule project, and you can find those references in the Project References property for the main rule project. Final topic: sharing and synchronizing decision services. Synchronization across business and development environments is initiated and controlled from Designer. The synchronization mechanism compares the versions of each element of a rule project that's stored in the Decision Center repository with the copy that's stored in Rule Designer. Another synchronization mechanism exists in the Decision Center Enterprise console that allows users to work offline in Rule Solutions for Office. The rules are edited in Rule Docs and can be synchronized between the Decision Center repository and a file system. Synchronization tools include the ability to publish an existing rule project from Rule Designer to Decision Center, or create a rule project in Rule Designer from an existing Decision Center project, or synchronize the Rule Designer and Decision Center copies of the projects to account for changes on either side. Synchronization is required whenever one group, either business or IT, makes an update that the other group must incorporate into their work. For example, when business users who are working in Decision Center identify changes or fixes that must be made to the vocabulary, their copy of the project must be synchronized back to Rule Designer. The developers then modify the BOM to take into account the vocabulary changes, and then publish the project back to Decision Center. The synchronization architecture uses a three-way comparison of the rule project in your local workspace in Rule Designer, the remote project in Decision Center, and the reference that computes the state of the synchronization. The reference state is created as a connection entry file in the Rule Designer workspace when you connect to Decision Center. The three-way comparison creates a checksum on both the remote and the local rules and compares them to the reference state. Here you see the connection dialog that opens when you want to synchronize between Decision Center and Rule Designer. The information that you enter here is stored in the .sync entries file. If there's a conflict during synchronization, Rule Designer opens to the Teams synchronizing perspective. In the Teams synchronizing perspective, the Synchronize view lists the conflicts and the direction of the change, either outgoing, which means the change was made in the rule designer copy and would need to be published to Decision Center, or incoming, which means a change was made in Decision Center and would need to overwrite the rule designer copy, or conflict, which means a change was made in both the local and remote versions. You can use the text compare view to see detailed differences between the artifacts and determine how to respond. The synchronization commands include publish, which sends artifacts from designer to Decision Center, update, which receives artifacts from Decision Center to overwrite the rule designer copy, override and publish, which resolves conflicts by replacing the Decision Center artifact with the rule designer version, and override and update, which resolves conflicts by replacing the rule designer artifact with the Decision Center version. To avoid conflicts, you need to choose the master source, and that's a decision that should be agreed on by both the business and development teams. If Decision Center repository is to be the master source, then the business users are in control of the copy of record. If the source code control system is to be the master source, then you need to make sure that copy is regularly synchronized with Decision Center to ensure that business users are working with the latest copy of the rules and vocabulary. You have now completed this unit. Having completed the unit, you should be able to identify the development tasks in building a decision management application, describe how to set up